Sir, I said I need to see your identification.
What crime am I suspected of committing?
You're making this difficult. If you don't show ID, I'll have to detain you.
Officer, I've committed no crime. Pumping gas is not illegal. I am a United States citizen. You have no probable...
Officer Ryan Callahan thought he was conducting routine immigration enforcement. Anonymous tip, suspicious activity at a gas station, possible undocumented workers in the area. In his mind, demanding identification was standard procedure, and compliance was expected. He had stopped dozens of people based on nothing more than how they looked, never questioned, never challenged. But when he pulled into the Shell station on Collins Street on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon and approached the muscular black man pumping gas into a pickup truck, he made a catastrophic miscalculation. Lieutenant Commander Damon Reeves, a decorated Navy SEAL with 18 years of service, 3 combat deployments, and a Bronze Star with Valor, born and raised in Houston, Texas, knew exactly what was happening. And when he calmly refused the officer's unlawful demand, citing the Fourth Amendment and his right to be free from unreasonable seizures, Officer Callahan made a series of decisions that would cost the city of Arlington $16.8 million. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly, the temperature reading 97 degrees on the bank sign across the street. Heat shimmered off the concrete, creating waves of distortion in the afternoon light. Callahan's patrol car sat idling near the air pump, his body camera already activated and recording as he stepped out and approached the man at pump number 7. The camera captured everything in sharp clarity. The confident stride, the hand resting on his duty belt, the assumption of authority that had served him well for over a decade. What Callahan didn't know, what he couldn't have anticipated, was that this wouldn't be like the dozens of other stops he'd conducted. This man wouldn't cower. This man wouldn't comply with an illegal order simply because a badge demanded it. This man had faced enemy fire in 3 different countries, had led special operations missions that remained classified, had buried brothers in arms and carried their memories with every breath. And this man knew his rights. The body camera lens caught everything, every word, every gesture, every moment of what was about to unfold. The very device meant to protect officers from false accusations would become the primary evidence that destroyed Callahan's career and forced an entire department to answer for years of unchecked discrimination. Officer Ryan Callahan had worked for the Arlington Police Department for 11 years, building what his supervisors called an impressive record of proactive community policing. He patrolled the areas near immigrant communities with particular enthusiasm, making stops that other officers might hesitate on, asking questions that pushed constitutional boundaries. His arrest numbers were consistently high. His supervisors praised his instincts, his willingness to act on hunches, his aggressive approach to what he called maintaining order. But beneath that commendation-filled personnel file lay a different story. 9 formal complaints over 8 years, each one alleging racial profiling and discriminatory enforcement. 9 citizens, mostly Black and Latino, who had filed paperwork describing the same pattern, stopped without cause, demanded to produce papers, treated as criminals for the offense of existing in public spaces while looking a certain way. Every single complaint had been marked unsubstantiated by internal affairs. Callahan had learned that as long as he claimed to be responding to tips or acting on reasonable suspicion, his department would protect him. The complaints became background noise, minor inconveniences that never resulted in meaningful discipline. The Arlington Police Department had implemented mandatory body cameras 4 years earlier, bowing to pressure from civil rights organizations after a series of misconduct allegations made national news. The policy was clear. Officers were required to activate their cameras for all citizen interactions, all traffic stops, all enforcement actions. The cameras were supposed to provide accountability, to ensure that officers followed constitutional guidelines, to protect both the public and the department from false claims. In practice, Callahan saw the camera as just another piece of equipment. He had grown comfortable with it, recording his stops, confident that his version of events would always prevail. After all, it had for 11 years. He had never faced real consequences for his methods. His supervisors reviewed footage only when complaints were filed, and even then, they watched with sympathetic eyes, finding justifications for whatever their officer had done. That institutional protection had made Callahan bold, perhaps too bold, because on this Tuesday afternoon, his body camera wouldn't just record another routine stop. It would document the moment his pattern of discrimination finally met someone who refused to be victimized by it. Lieutenant Commander Damon Reeves was 38 years old, born and raised in Houston, Texas, the third generation of his family to wear the uniform of the United States military. His grandfather had served in Korea, earning a Purple Heart at the Chosin Reservoir. His father had deployed to Desert Storm, coming home with stories of sand and sacrifice that shaped young Damon's understanding of duty. By the time he graduated from high school, there was never any question about his path. He enlisted in the Navy at 18, qualified for Bud, S training at 20, and earned his SEAL Trident at 21. 18 years of service had followed. 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan, where he led direct action missions against high-value targets. 2 tours in Iraq during the most violent years of the insurgency. Classified operations in countries he would never be permitted to name, doing work that would never appear in any official record. He had lost friends in firefights, held dying brothers in his arms, and carried the weight of those memories with quiet dignity. His chest of commendations told part of the story. Bronze Star with Valor for actions during a nighttime raid in Helmand Province, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal, Combat Action Ribbon, multiple campaign medals that trace the geography of America's wars. But medals never captured the full truth of what men like Reeves had given. Currently, he was stationed at Naval Air Station Fort Worth, serving as a training instructor for the next generation of special operators. It was a position of honor, reserved for those whose experience was too valuable to risk in the field any longer. He taught young sailors what combat really meant, preparing them for the crucible that awaited. That Tuesday was supposed to be simple, a day off from the base, errands to run. He wore faded jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, his muscular frame evident but unremarkable. He drove his personal vehicle, a black Ford F-150 registered to his Arlington address, the same truck he'd owned for 4 years. Nothing about his appearance suggested military service. Nothing about his day suggested it would become a defining moment in civil rights litigation. He just needed gas. The timestamp on Officer Callahan's body camera read 2:47 p.m. when he pulled his patrol car into the Shell station on Collins Street. The afternoon sun blazed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete and creating perfect visibility for the camera's lens. Callahan's eyes scanned the pumps as he entered the lot, a habit developed over years of what he called proactive policing. His gaze landed on pump number 7, a muscular black man in civilian clothes, filling a black Ford F-150. Something in Callahan's mind clicked. An instinct, he would later claim. A hunch born of experience. He ran the plates through his dashboard computer before even exiting his vehicle. The results came back clean. Registered to Damon Reeves at an Arlington address. No warrants. No violations. No flags of any kind. A reasonable officer would have driven away. There was no crime, no traffic violation, no basis for any interaction whatsoever. But Callahan wasn't interested in reasonable. He was interested in his hunches, and his hunches told him this man needed to be questioned. He stepped out of his patrol car, his hand moving to rest on his duty belt in a gesture of authority. The body camera captured his approach across the lot, the crunch of his boots on the heated pavement, the deliberate pace of a man who expected compliance. The gas station's security system recorded the same approach from 2 additional angles, ceiling-mounted cameras providing wide views of the entire forecourt. Reeves noticed the officer approaching when Callahan was still 20 feet away. He continued pumping gas, his posture relaxed but alert, the situational awareness of a combat veteran automatically cataloging the threat level. "Sir," Callahan called out, his voice carrying across the pump island, "I need to see your identification and proof that you're legally in this country." The words hung in the superheated air. The body camera captured Reeves's expression shifting from neutral to something harder, a controlled response visible only to those who knew what to look for. He removed the nozzle from his truck, replaced it in the pump cradle, and turned to face the officer fully. "What crime am I suspected of committing?" Reeves asked, his voice calm and measured, the the tone of a man who had faced far worse than a badge with an attitude. Reeves's response was measured, his voice carrying the steady cadence of a man who had briefed generals and commanded operators in combat zones. The body camera captured every word with crystal clarity. "Officer, I'm an American citizen. I was born in Houston, Texas. I've lived in this state my entire life." He reached slowly toward his back pocket, his movements deliberate and visible. "I'm going to show you my driver's license." He produced a Texas driver's license, holding it up so Callahan could see the laminated card gleaming in the afternoon sun. The body camera recorded the ID clearly. Damon Reeves, Houston address listed as place of birth, the photo matching the man standing before him perfectly. Callahan barely glanced at it. His camera captured his own dismissive gesture, his hand waving the license away as if it meant nothing. This could be fake. Anyone can get a fake ID these days. Reeves's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of controlled anger that only someone trained to read micro-expressions would notice. "I also have my military identification. I'm a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy." He reached for his wallet again, producing the Department of Defense Common Access Card, the distinctive design unmistakable to anyone who had ever seen one. The eagle emblem, the holographic seal, his photo, name, rank, and service branch displayed prominently. "Anyone can get a fake military ID," Callahan said, his tone dismissive, his camera recording his own words for posterity. "That doesn't prove anything." Reeves returned both cards to his wallet, his movements slow and controlled. "Officer, the Fourth Amendment protects me from unreasonable searches and seizures. You have no probable cause to detain me. You have no reasonable suspicion of any crime. I was pumping gas. That's not illegal. Being black in Texas isn't illegal either, despite what your approach might suggest." The body camera captured Callahan's face flushing, the color rising in his cheeks visible even in the harsh afternoon light. He wasn't accustomed to this. The people he stopped usually complied, intimidated by the badge, afraid of consequences. This man showed no fear. His military bearing was evident in every controlled gesture, every measured word. Around them, the gas station had grown quiet. Other customers had stopped what they were doing, watching the confrontation unfold. The security cameras captured a woman near Pump 3 pulling out her phone, beginning to record. A man at Pump 9 stood frozen, his hand still on the nozzle, staring openly. "You're making this difficult," Callahan said, his voice rising slightly, the frustration bleeding through. "If you've got nothing to hide, you should have no problem answering my questions." "I've answered your questions," Reeves replied, his calm unwavering. "I'm an American citizen. I was born here. I've served this country for 18 years. You have no legal authority to demand my papers, and I'm not going to pretend you do." Callahan's hand moved to his radio, his body camera capturing the motion as he keyed the microphone. "Dispatch, this is Unit 147. I need backup at the Shell station on Collins Street. Uncooperative individual, possible immigration violation." The words crackled across the airwaves, recorded on the body camera's audio feed. Reeves heard them clearly, his expression remaining neutral even as the situation intensified. He knew what was happening. He had seen this playbook before, watched it unfold in countries where civil rights were theoretical concepts. He never expected to experience it in his own. 6 minutes later, a second patrol car pulled into the station. Officer Denise Hartley stepped out, her own body camera activated and recording, providing a new angle on the confrontation. She was younger than Callahan, 3 years on the force, still deferential to senior officers in ways that would later haunt her. Callahan met her halfway across the lot, their conversation captured on both cameras from different perspectives. Got a black male, refused to provide documentation, being uncooperative. Possibly undocumented, says he's military but the ID looks suspicious. Hartley's camera recorded her face as she listened, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. She glanced toward Reeves, who stood calmly by his truck, hands visible at his sides, posture non-threatening. Nothing about him suggested danger. Nothing about the scene suggested criminal activity. But she said nothing. She didn't challenge Callahan's characterization. She didn't ask what crime had been committed. She simply nodded and followed her senior colleague back toward Pump 7, her camera now providing a second law enforcement perspective on what was about to unfold. "Sir," Callahan announced, his voice carrying renewed authority with backup present, "if you've got nothing to hide, you'll come with us to verify your status. We can sort this out at the station." Reeves's response was immediate, his voice firm but controlled. "I'm not going anywhere. I've committed no crime. You have no probable cause to arrest me, no reasonable suspicion to detain me. I'm a United States citizen and a lieutenant commander in the Navy SEALs. I've told you this multiple times. Your request is unconstitutional, and I'm refusing it." Hartley's camera captured her shifting uncomfortably, her weight moving from one foot to the other. She recognized the constitutional issue. She had sat through the training, but Callahan was already moving forward, and she wasn't prepared to stop him. Callahan's patience had reached its limit. The body camera captured his hand moving toward the handcuffs on his belt, the metallic jingle audible on the audio feed. "That's it. You're under arrest for failure to identify and obstruction of a police investigation." Reeves didn't move, didn't flinch, but his voice carried a new edge of steel. "Officer, I know Texas law. Failure to identify only applies when someone has been lawfully arrested for another offense. You haven't arrested me for anything. You can't arrest me for failing to comply with an unlawful order. What you're doing right now is illegal." Callahan stepped forward, reaching for Reeves's arm. Both body cameras captured the moment from different angles. Hartley's footage showed Callahan's aggressive approach, the tension in his shoulders, the determination in his stride. Callahan's own camera recorded his hands reaching toward Reeves, the view bouncing slightly with each step. Reeves spoke clearly, his voice projected for the cameras, for the witnesses, for the record that would eventually be reviewed in federal court. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Damon Reeves. Service number 427896153, United States Navy SEALs. I am an American citizen, born in Houston, Texas. I am being illegally detained without probable cause or reasonable suspicion of any crime. I am not resisting arrest." He turned slowly, placing his hands behind his back in a gesture of compliance that contradicted every instinct his training had instilled. He had been taught to never surrender, to fight until the last breath. But he also understood that resistance here would give them exactly what they wanted: an excuse, a justification, a way to transform their illegal detention into something that looked legitimate. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the sound captured on both body cameras simultaneously. Callahan pulled them tight, tighter than necessary, the metal biting into skin that had rope burns and combat scars. Reeves said nothing, his face a mask of controlled composure. "Check his wallet," Callahan ordered, gesturing toward the truck. Hartley moved to comply, her camera recording her hands retrieving the wallet from where Reeves had placed it on his truck bed. She opened it, and her camera captured the contents in sharp detail. Texas driver's license, military ID card, credit cards. A photo of an older couple, Reeves's parents based on the resemblance. She pulled out the military ID, studying it closely. Her camera recorded every detail. The Department of Defense seal. The holographic security features. United States Navy printed clearly across the card. Lieutenant Commander. The same face looking back at her from both the photo and the man now in handcuffs. "He's got a military ID," she said quietly, her voice nearly a whisper but still captured by Callahan's body camera microphone. "It looks real. It says Navy." "I told you, anyone can fake those," Callahan replied, his dismissal captured on both audio feeds. "We'll verify at the station. Put him in the car." The gas station security cameras captured what the body cameras couldn't. The wide shot of the entire forecourt, customers frozen in disbelief, a mother pulling her children close, an elderly man shaking his head slowly, the woman at pump 3 still recording on her phone, her hand trembling visibly. As Hartley guided Reeves toward the patrol car, a voice cut through the afternoon heat. A white woman in her 50s, standing near the convenience store entrance, her shopping bag forgotten at her feet. "He said he's military," she shouted, her voice cracking with outrage. "This is wrong! He served this country! The security cameras captured her face, her horror, her helplessness. The body cameras captured Reeves being placed in the back of Callahan's patrol car, his head guided down with unnecessary force, his decorated service meaning nothing to the man who held the power in this moment. The booking area at Arlington Police Department hummed with fluorescent lighting and the quiet efficiency of bureaucratic processing. Callahan marched Reeves through the doors at 3:34 p.m., both their images captured on the facility's security system. The body cameras remained active, department policy requiring continuous recording until suspects were fully processed. Officer Jerome Whitfield sat behind the intake desk, a 20-year veteran who had seen every type of arrest come through these doors. He looked up as Callahan approached, his expression neutral until he heard the charges. "Failure to identify and obstruction," Callahan announced, pushing Reeves forward slightly. "Possibly undocumented. Refused to cooperate with immigration verification." Whitfield's eyes moved from Callahan to Reeves, taking in the military bearing, the controlled posture, the calm dignity despite the handcuffs. "You got ID on him?" Hartley stepped forward, placing Reeves's wallet on the counter. Whitfield opened it, and his eyebrows rose sharply as he examined the contents. The Texas driver's license. The military ID card with its unmistakable Department of Defense insignia. He held the CAC card up to the light, examining the holographic features that were impossible to counterfeit. "This says he's a lieutenant commander," Whitfield said slowly, his voice carrying a new weight. "United States Navy." "Could be fake," Callahan repeated, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. Whitfield ignored him, turning to his computer. His fingers moved across the keyboard, accessing databases that would tell him everything he needed to know. The body cameras captured his face as the results populated his screen. His expression shifted from skepticism to concern to something approaching alarm. "Damon Reeves," he read aloud. "United States citizen. Born Houston, Texas, 1986. Active duty Navy, stationed at Naval Air Station Fort Worth. 18 years of service. Security clearance level." He paused, looking up at Callahan. "His security clearance is higher than anyone in this building, including the chief." The silence that followed was deafening, captured on multiple recording devices throughout the intake area. Whitfield reached for his phone. "I'm calling the base." The conversation that followed was brief and devastating. The Naval Air Station confirmed everything. Lieutenant Commander Damon Reeves. SEAL Team Instructor, Bronze Star recipient. Currently on authorized leave. The voice on the other end of the line grew increasingly cold as Whitfield explained the situation. Word traveled up the chain with terrifying speed. Sergeant Patricia Okonkwo appeared within minutes, demanding to see the body camera footage. They gathered in a small office, Callahan's recording playing on a monitor, while Hartley's footage waited in queue. The sergeant's face went pale within the first 2 minutes. By the time Reeves's clear statement of his name, rank, and service number played through the speakers, her jaw was clenched so tight the muscles stood out on her neck. She watched Callahan dismiss the military ID. She watched Reeves being handcuffed without resistance. She watched a decorated Navy SEAL being treated like a criminal for the offense of pumping gas while black. "Get him out of holding," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Now, Reeves was released 4 hours after his arrest, the charges evaporating like morning dew under the Texas sun. No paperwork, no formal booking completed. Just a quiet escort to the front desk, where his belongings were returned in a plastic bag. But the damage was already done. His commanding officer at the base had been notified within an hour of his arrest. The Judge Advocate General's office was aware before he even walked out the door. The machinery of military legal response had already begun to turn, and it would not stop until someone answered for what had happened to one of their own. Reeves collected his wallet, his keys, his phone. He said nothing to the officers who avoided his eyes. He simply walked out into the evening air, a free man who had been reminded, on American soil, that his citizenship and his service meant nothing to those who saw only the color of his skin. 3 days after his release, Reeves walked into the downtown Dallas offices of Dubois and Associates, a firm renowned for taking on cases that other attorneys deemed too difficult or too dangerous. Carolyn Dubois had spent 25 years building a reputation as one of the most formidable civil rights lawyers in Texas. She had argued before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals 7 times, winning 6. She had forced policy changes in police departments across the state, and when she heard Damon Reeves' story, she cleared her schedule for the rest of the week. "Tell me everything," she said, leaning forward across her mahogany desk. "Don't leave out a single detail." Reeves recounted the encounter with military precision, the timestamps, the exact words spoken, the positions of everyone involved. His training had taught him to observe and remember, skills that had kept him alive in combat zones and would now serve him in a different kind of battle. Dubois filed requests under the Texas Public Information Act that same afternoon. Body camera footage from both officers, dispatch recordings, gas station security footage, personnel files for Callahan and Hartley. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence that the city was legally required to provide. The footage arrived 6 weeks later, delivered on encrypted drives to her office. Dubois cleared an entire evening, ordering dinner to be brought in as she prepared to review every second. She started with Callahan's body camera, watching his approach across the parking lot, his hand moving to his belt, his first words to Reeves. She switched to Hartley's footage, seeing the same encounter from a different angle. Then the gas station security cameras, 2 ceiling-mounted lenses that captured the wide view of the entire confrontation. She watched Reeves calmly present his identification. She watched Callahan dismiss it without examination. She watched Reeves cite the Fourth Amendment with perfect accuracy. She watched handcuffs click around the wrists of a man who had earned a Bronze Star for valor under fire. When the footage ended, Dubois sat in silence for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Reeves directly. "This is the most clear-cut Fourth Amendment violation I've seen in 25 years of practice," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "We're not just filing a lawsuit, we're going to make an example of them." The federal complaint was filed in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Texas 2 weeks later. Damon Reeves versus City of Arlington, Officer Ryan Callahan and Officer Denise Hartley. The charges filled 17 pages. Violation of Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure, false arrest, unlawful detention, racial profiling, selective enforcement based on race, intentional infliction of emotional distress, deprivation of rights under color of law. The city's response came within a month. Their attorneys, clearly having reviewed the footage and understood exactly how devastating it would be in front of a jury, offered to settle. $50,000, a formal apology, no admission of wrongdoing. Dubois's rejection was immediate and absolute. $50,000, she said during the phone call with the city's legal team, her voice carrying the cold fury of someone who had spent decades fighting exactly this kind of injustice. "Your officer arrested a Navy SEAL for pumping gas. He dismissed valid military identification. He ignored 18 years of service to this country. 50,000 is an insult, and we both know it. We'll see you in court." The case went to trial 19 months after that Tuesday afternoon at the Shell station. The federal courthouse in downtown Dallas had seen its share of high-profile cases, but nothing quite like this. Lines formed outside the building before dawn, spectators hoping to secure one of the limited public seats in the gallery. Veterans groups had mobilized from across the state, men and women in caps identifying their service branches, their wars, their units, Navy SEALs in civilian clothes, their quiet presence speaking volumes. Civil rights organizations filled entire rows, representatives from the NAACP, the ACLU, and a dozen local advocacy groups. National media occupied the press section, cameras prohibited inside, but reporters ready to document every word. The courtroom fell silent as the body camera footage began to play. Dubois had arranged for the recordings to be displayed on 4 large screens positioned around the room, synchronized to show multiple angles simultaneously. The jury of 12 Texans watched from their box, their faces illuminated by the footage, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disbelief to barely concealed anger. They saw Callahan approach a man who was doing nothing more than pumping gas. They heard the demand for papers, for proof of citizenship, delivered without any predicate, without any legal justification. They watched Reeves calmly produce identification that Callahan refused to examine. They heard Reeves cite the Fourth Amendment with accuracy that would impress a constitutional law professor. And they watched handcuffs close around his wrists while he stated his name, rank, and service number for the record. The contrast was devastating. Reeves's calm, controlled demeanor against Callahan's escalating aggression. Military discipline against authoritarian overreach. A man who had every right to be outraged maintaining perfect composure while an officer with a badge trampled constitutional protections. Reeves testified for 6 hours over 2 days. Dubois guided him through his background, his service record, the details of that afternoon. But it was when she asked about his 18 years as a Navy SEAL that the courtroom truly fell silent. "I've served in 3 combat zones," Reeves said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I've done things for this country that I can never speak about publicly. I've watched brothers die beside me, held them as they took their last breaths, and promised them their sacrifice mattered. I came home carrying their memories, believing that what we fought for actually meant something." He paused, and the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. "I've taken fire for this flag in 3 different countries. I've bled for it, I've killed for it, and I came home to be told I don't belong here, to have my citizenship questioned, to have my identification dismissed as fake, to be handcuffed at a gas station because the color of my skin made an officer decide I was illegal." Several jurors were crying. A veteran in the gallery wiped his eyes openly, making no effort to hide his emotion. Expert witnesses followed. Professor Lawrence Goodwin from the University of Texas School of Law explained Fourth Amendment jurisprudence in clear terms, demonstrating how every element of Reeves's stop violated established constitutional protections. Dr. Simone Baptiste, a sociologist specializing in law enforcement patterns, presented statistical analysis of Callahan's prior complaints, showing a clear pattern of targeting Black and Latino citizens. Those 9 prior complaints, previously dismissed as unsubstantiated, took on new significance in the light of body camera evidence. The jury saw not an isolated incident, but the latest in a documented pattern of discriminatory enforcement, a pattern that the Arlington Police Department had chosen to ignore. The defense attempted to argue qualified immunity, claiming Callahan could have reasonably believed his actions were lawful. Dubois dismantled that argument with surgical precision, playing the footage of Reeves explaining exactly why the stop was unconstitutional, his words captured clearly on the officer's own equipment. Lieutenant Commander Reeves told Officer Callahan he was violating the Fourth Amendment, she told the jury in her closing argument. He explained the law accurately. He offered valid identification, and Officer Callahan arrested him anyway. That's not a reasonable mistake. That's willful indifference to constitutional rights. That's exactly what qualified immunity was never meant to protect. The jury deliberated for 2 days, 47 hours of discussion behind closed doors, 12 citizens weighing the evidence they had seen, the testimony they had heard, the footage that had shown them exactly what happened on that Tuesday afternoon. The waiting was agony. Reeves spent it surrounded by family in a hotel suite near the courthouse, unable to eat, barely able to sleep, his combat-trained mind running scenarios he couldn't control. When the call came that a verdict had been reached, the courtroom filled within minutes, every seat occupied, spectators lining the walls, the air thick with tension and anticipation. Reeves sat at the plaintiff's table, his posture rigid, his hands folded in front of him. Dubois placed a steadying hand on his arm as the jury filed back into the box. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman who had served as an Army nurse during the Gulf War, stood to read the verdict. Her voice was clear and unwavering. "On the count of Fourth Amendment violation, we find the defendants liable." The words seemed to echo in the silent courtroom. "On the count of false arrest, we find the defendants liable. On the count of unlawful detention, we find the defendants liable. On the count of racial profiling, we find the defendants liable. On the count of intentional infliction of emotional distress, we find the defendants liable. Liable on all counts. Every charge sustained, every violation acknowledged. The damages phase lasted another week. The jury heard testimony about what that arrest had cost Damon Reeves beyond the 4 hours in detention. A psychologist described the symptoms of post-traumatic stress that had emerged, the hypervigilance that now accompanied every interaction with law enforcement, the nightmares that transported him back to that gas station, handcuffs clicking around his wrists while he stood helpless. Colleagues from the Naval Air Station testified about the impact on his career, the security review triggered by his arrest, the questions about his judgment, the whispered conversations that followed him through the halls of the base where he had once commanded universal respect. A fellow SEAL, his voice breaking, described watching a man who had never shown fear in combat flinch at the sight of a police car. Reeves himself testified again, his composure finally cracking as he described what it felt like to serve a country for 18 years and then be told he didn't belong. "I've been shot at," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been in firefights where I thought I wouldn't make it home. None of that scared me as much as standing in that gas station, knowing that my citizenship, my service, my very existence as an American meant nothing to the man with the badge." The jury deliberated on damages for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreperson stood once more. "We award the plaintiff compensatory damages in the amount of $9,200,000. She paused, letting the number settle over the courtroom. "And we award punitive damages in the amount of $7,600,000. The total hung in the air, $16.8 million, the largest civil rights verdict in Arlington history, the largest against any police department in the Northern District of Texas. The courtroom erupted, cheers and applause breaking through the usual decorum of federal court. The judge made no effort to silence them, allowing the moment its due. Dubois turned to Reeves, her professional composure finally breaking into a smile of pure vindication. Reeves stood slowly, turning toward the gallery where his family sat. His mother was sobbing openly, her hands pressed to her face. His sister held her tight, tears streaming down her own cheeks, but it was his father who drew Reeves's gaze. James Reeves, 71 years old, a Vietnam veteran who had faced his own battles with a country that didn't always honor the service of black men. He sat in the front row, his weathered face wet with tears, his shoulders shaking with emotion he had held back for 19 months. He had watched his son be arrested for existing. He had waited through every day of the trial, every piece of testimony, every moment of deliberation. Now he watched his son vindicated. Damon crossed to the gallery railing, reaching over to embrace his father. The two men held each other, combat veterans from different generations, connected by service and sacrifice, and the tears that neither tried to hide. Around them, the courtroom continued to celebrate, but for this moment, there was only a father and son, and the justice that had finally been delivered. Officer Ryan Callahan was terminated before the sun set on verdict day. The Arlington Police Department, facing unprecedented public scrutiny and the largest civil rights judgment in the city's history, moved with a speed that surprised even the most cynical observers. His badge was collected, his service weapons surrendered, his 11-year career ending not with retirement honors, but with an escort out of the building by internal affairs officers. Officer Denise Hartley was suspended immediately pending a full review of her conduct. The investigation lasted 3 months, documented her failure to intervene when constitutional violations occurred in her presence, her complicity in an unlawful arrest. She resigned before the disciplinary board could render its verdict, her own law enforcement career effectively over at 26 years old. But the reckoning didn't stop with 2 officers. The Department of Justice announced a pattern and practice investigation into the Arlington Police Department within weeks of the verdict. Federal investigators descended on the department, reviewing years of complaint records, body camera footage, arrest statistics. What they found confirmed what the trial had suggested: a systemic pattern of discriminatory enforcement, complaints routinely dismissed without meaningful investigation, officers like Callahan protected by a culture that valued arrest numbers over constitutional compliance. The consent decree that followed mandated sweeping reforms, comprehensive Fourth Amendment training for every officer with annual recertification requirements, mandatory implicit bias education with quarterly assessments, New body camera protocols requiring supervisory review of any arrest where constitutional challenges were raised. An independent civilian oversight board with full investigative authority, something the department had resisted for years. Reeves watched the reforms unfold from a distance, his attention focused on building something that would outlast any single verdict. Using a portion of his settlement, he established the Reeves Veterans Civil Rights Foundation, an organization providing free legal representation to veterans facing discrimination. Former service members who had been profiled, harassed, wrongfully arrested, veterans who had given years to their country only to find that their citizenship was questioned the moment they returned to civilian life. "We serve this nation," Reeves said at the foundation's launch, surrounded by veterans from every branch, every era. "And when we come home, we deserve to be treated like the Americans we are. This foundation exists to make sure that when someone violates those rights, there are consequences." His own service continued. 6 months after the verdict, he was promoted to commander, a rank that reflected both his years of exceptional performance and the Navy's unequivocal support throughout his ordeal. He remained at Naval Air Station Fort Worth, training the next generation of special operators, teaching them not just how to fight, but how to uphold the values they were fighting for. The body camera footage from that Tuesday afternoon took on a life of its own. Law enforcement training academies across the country incorporated it into their curricula, a stark example of how implicit bias could lead to catastrophic constitutional violations. Instructors paused the video at key moments, analyzing Callahan's dismissive gestures, Reeves's textbook-perfect assertion of his rights, the exact point where a lawful interaction became an illegal arrest. The gas station security footage went viral within days of being released after the trial. Millions of views across social media platforms, shared and reshared by veterans groups, civil rights organizations, ordinary citizens who watched in horror as a decorated Navy SEAL was handcuffed for pumping gas. The comment sections filled with outrage, with personal stories, with demands for accountability that extended far beyond Arlington, Texas. National conversations erupted about racial profiling, about the treatment of Black veterans, about the gap between the freedoms Americans claim to cherish and the reality faced by those whose skin color made them perpetual suspects. Congressional hearings referenced the case. Presidential candidates invoked Reeves's name. A moment at a gas station became a symbol of something much larger. And in Arlington, at the Shell station on Collins Street, life returned to normal. Cars pulled in for gas, customers came and went, the afternoon sun continued to beat down on the Texas concrete. But something had changed. A small plaque appeared near Pump 7, placed there by the station's owner. It read simply, "Commander Damon Reeves, American hero, vindicated." If you think this situation was bad, wait until you see what happens in the case on the right-hand side.